What's up guys, Lifting here. In this video I'm going to show you the core principles of gearing your build. I'll be using my own character as reference, but the principles I show you here can be applied to any build as long as you can tell the difference between life and energy shield. To start with, I'm going to take my current character in Legion and strip her of her clothes, armor, until she's barely legal. From here our goal is to gear this character well enough so that it can effectively clear maps from tier 1 to tier 10, all within the budget of 20 chaos orbs or less. For the sake of transparency, I do not include the cost of minor crafting recipes, basic flask setup, linking anything below 5 links, nor coloring the sockets into this equation, as this is rather cheap to begin with, and anyone who plays the game and get to maps will get enough chromatics, jewelers and fusings and so forth to do this without further investment, just by progressing the game. So let's begin. When I go to my character sheet and check the defensive tab, you can see that I have -60 to all resistances, just like you, in case you also aren't wearing any clothes as you're watching this video. However, there is still the issue of my character being level 91 with every benefit that includes, and a character that has just reached maps obviously won't be at that level. So to make it a bit more fair, I'm going to respec 23 points, as that will leave us at an amount equivalent to it being level 68, which is the time you would generally start mapping. And we can now start gearing our character. There are 5 primary goals we will want to achieve through the gearing process. First of all, we will want to ensure that we give our life nodes in the skill tree something to scale off. These are percentage nodes, and unless you get enough flat life on your gear, they won't be very efficient. The same goes for energy shield based builds. To make sure your energy shield nodes have something to scale off, you will want to get enough flat energy shield on your gear for it to efficiently scale. Secondly, we will want to cap our elemental resistances and thus take them from the -60% they are currently at and all the way up to 75% to cap them. And don't worry about chaos resistance for now. Thirdly, we will need to look for gear that complements the type of defense that this build is using. In this case it is armor, so we will look for gear that primarily adds to this. Then we will also want to ensure that we have enough of each attribute, strength, dex, intelligence, to make sure we meet the requirements of the skill gems that we use in our setup. And finally, we will want to get a 5-link weapon or body armor to ensure that we can probably support our main skill, in this case Flicker Strike. Generally speaking, unless you already have the weapon you'll be using for very late game, it is best to use a body armor, as these are easier to replace. And just as a general guideline, I recommend having at least 3000 health when you start mapping, and preferably more. I already have that due to my high character level, but for the sake of the video I'm going to pretend that I do not. We're now going to start looking for gear, and as a quick summary, we're going to look for gear that adds to life, resistances, armor, attributes, and also a 5-link to complement our main skill setup. And let's start with that actually, a 5-link. And we're going to look for a body armor that provides a bit of armor that is at least 5-linked with a decent life roll and a proper amount of elemental resistances. And since we don't need any specific type of elemental resistances at this time, but in general just more of all of them, we will use the pseudo total elemental resistance stat filter and set it to 70. We're not going to bother trying to get attributes on the body armor, as there are better types of equipment to get that on, which I will show you later in the video. For now we will hit the search button, and as you can see there are plenty of good and cheap 5-link body armors that we can use for our build here. Before you purchase though, you need to pay attention to whether or not the item is corrupted, because if it is, then you won't be able to change the quality, colors or amount of sockets without having to further invest extra currency to re-roll it via the crafting bench, and when looking for a budget gear, that is generally not worth it. If the armor has the right colors for your gem setup, then it's fine and you can go ahead and purchase it, but if not, it would be better to not get a corrupted item. For my setup, I will want at least 2 green and 3 red sockets. And if we're going to allow corrupted gems to be part of our search, I'm going to add that restriction to our filter and then search again. When we add specific color filters, we risk the price significantly increasing. And since we are on a budget, I'm not willing to pay more than 3 to 5 chaos orbs for my chest armor. There's a pretty decent one for 5 chaos here, but before we purchase that, let's first see what we can get if we remove the color restrictions from the sockets, just in case. So I'm going to go back and remove the color restriction and instead filter out corrupted items from our search, and I'm also going to set a maximum buyout price of 5 chaos and then search again. This gives us a list of cheap 5 linked armors that all fit the criteria that we set up, that despite maybe not having the right socket colors, still allow us to reroll those to whatever we need. So which one do we choose here? Well, since all of these options fit our criteria, we of course want the one that provides the most relative to its cost. So we're going to go back to our stat filter and increase our minimum requirements and search again. If nothing shows up during the next search, it means that we have set the requirements too strict, and we will have to reduce it again until something shows up, or increase the amount of currency that we're willing to pay. But in this case, we got a nice result of a 5-link body armor with good life and high elemental resistance rolls on an armor base at the cost of 5 chaos. Perfect. Since this is a life-based build, the life nodes we pick up in our skill tree further scales the 97 flat life from the chest armor, and instead of just giving the 97 life, it ends up adding up to 225 health instead. The more life nodes we pick up, the more efficiently the life we obtain via the gear will be scaled. And the more flat life we have, the more efficiently we use our life nodes. We can also see that our resistances have significantly improved, but there's still a long way to go and we only have 15 chaos orbs left. Next, we're going to look for a weapon, and depending on the type of build you're playing, you of course need to look for a weapon that scales off the type of nodes you have in your skill tree. As you can see, my build focuses on two-handed maces. If you're using a sword, axe, claw, dagger, etc., then you should obviously look for a weapon relative to that, and you will also want to take into consideration whether you primarily scale physical damage or elemental damage. But since this is a physical two-handed mace build, we will look for a weapon that fits this category. So we will select two-handed mace and set a maximum buyout of 3 chaos to begin with. Oh, and I forgot to say this before, but this applies to any purchase that you make for your character, that you will also want to set a maximum level requirement to ensure you won't end up purchasing an item you can't use yet. In this case we set it to 68, as that is the time where you would normally start mapping and then search. This again gives us a long list of items that potentially might be good for our setup. However, the most important aspect of finding a good weapon, generally speaking, is to simply get the one with the highest DPS, and in our case, physical DPS. To find the one that has the highest damage out of all these choices, the easiest way is to simply click the DPS icon down here, and it will sort the items based on the amount of DPS they provide, starting with the highest first. Now this shows us a mall with 656 DPS, which is pretty damn good for its price. However, when we look a bit closer, we can see that it only deals 277 physical DPS, and that the rest is elemental damage. Since this build doesn't scale elemental damage but physical damage, the elemental damage, while beneficial, just isn't scaled very effectively in our build, and we're much better off getting a weapon with high physical DPS, even if it's slightly lower. So instead of buying this one, we are instead going to click the physical DPS button and sort it by that. This brings up the Maroi Urki hammer, which is actually rather good by itself, but since my build doesn't really benefit from the implicit pulverize, I'm going to see what else there is available. And it seems that it is mostly unique items that pop up here. In case I don't want any of those unique items, I can go back to my search filters and select any non-unique under the item rarity section, search again, and then filter by physical DPS. This brings up a very nice maul with 446 pure physical damage that, despite having less total damage than the hybrid fist elemental damage weapon we saw before, will scale much more effectively and grant us more damage overall. So we will buy this. Generally speaking, any two-handed weapon above 350 of relevant DPS type will be more than enough for when you start mapping. For late game, you typically will want to look out for a weapon with 450 plus DPS. When speaking of two-handed weapons, that is, the more the better of course, but there are lots of factors that can play into determining the right endgame weapon for you. The build I'm currently playing uses Tidebreaker with 450 DPS, but because of that implicit endurance charge on melee stun and extra damage per endurance charge, that of course adds a lot more damage that just isn't calculated into the DPS of the weapon itself. For caster weapons it is a bit different, as they don't benefit from the DPS of the weapon itself, but rather various different affix rolls that complement that certain element, spell or chaos damage skill that you're using for your belt. Anything that says adds to without specifically mentioning spells is only going to apply the damage to the weapon attack itself, and thus not work for the spells. So we now have a weapon and a 5-link body armor for our main skill setup. From here on we will focus on getting items that will cover the remaining resistance, life and attribute requirements. Let's start with the belt, as this is typically a great item to try and get a lot of life and resistances on, as the other affixes that can be rolled on a belt typically isn't of great importance, not until very late game at least. So we're going to select belt, set the maximum level requirement of 68, set a maximum buyout price of 3 chaos, and then add a high maximum life requirement and a high total elemental resistance requirement for the belt to have, and then click search. Here we get a decent selection, and let's get the one that provides the highest amount of elemental resistances of the ones listed. To see which one offers that, similarly to when we sorted for weapon DPS, click the total elemental resistance roll affix that we picked from the stat filter, and it will sort the belts listed ranging from the highest resistance rolls to lowest. Of the ones listed here, there are 2 very similar belts. The first has slightly more resistance and the other slightly more health. However, the second one only costs 1 chaos as opposed to the first one that costs 3. So because the differences are so minor, we're going to go for option number 2. So that one was sold. Let's try another one. It's been listed for 0 chaos, which probably means that the seller just threw it in a tab and forget to set the price, or that they are scumbagging and trying to make the item appear first on the list of items showing up despite them having a specific price in mind already. But let's hope to be pleasantly surprised here. I will whisper him and offer him 2 chaos for the belt and see if he's willing to sell. So, no dice this time either, and this is a good example of why I don't enjoy bartering or haggling for items in Path of Exile. So to prevent the 0 chaos belts from showing up, I'm gonna set a minimum price of 1 chaos on the belts and slightly reduce my life and resistance requirements too, and do a new search. Fortunately, I found someone with mental problems, and he was willing to sell me this studded belt with great life and resistance rolls. It even has an open prefix, so that means that we can add some extra armor to it too. Excellent. From our character sheet we can see that both our fire and lightning resistance have now started to move into the positive range, but there is of course still much more to do. So next up I will want to get an amulet. Amulets, generally speaking, are amongst the best choice of items to try and cover a big part of your attribute requirements on. This is because many of the amulets, such as the citrine, agate, turquoise and onyx bases, provide this implicitly. For my build I need 155 dexterity to be able to use my flicker strike gem and 111 intelligence for my blasphemy gem. But now, to be fair, your skill gems will have a lower attribute requirement as you start mapping, as they will be lower level, but you get the point, and for the sake of the video we are just going to pretend that these are the numbers that we would need for now. So back to the trade side. Once again we choose the type of item we're interested in, a maximum buyout price of 3 chaos, and then add dexterity, intelligence, life and total resistance stat filter to the item. The more stat filters we add, the less we can demand of the item, unless we're willing to increase the price. But we will try a search for this first, and if this doesn't bring anything up, we will go back and adjust these. Fortunately, this search did provide us with 2 relevant options, and when comparing the 2, the first amulet seems like the best choice, as it offers almost as much dex and intelligence as the second, but also more life and resistances, and for a better price. So let's try and get that one. Alright, excellent. We got it, and it even has a prefix open, so I'm going to add the melee damage and +1 to melee attack range too, as it benefits my build. Since this is a turquoise amulet, I also know that the implicit 18 dex and intelligence that it currently provides can be improved by up to 24. This is done via blessed orbs, and I am going to be satisfied with anything that rolls 23 or above, but it seems we got the 24 roll after having spent 8 blessed orbs. Fortunately, these aren't very expensive, and it is definitely worth the cost for those situations where you otherwise can't find another way to reach a certain attribute requirement without having to buy a different item. In this situation, I just used the blessed orbs as a way of educating and showing you that it can be done, not necessarily because it was necessary. Now, considering we are still able to get 2 rings, a helmet and boots, our resistances are also starting to look pretty good, and we still have 11 chaos orbs left to buy for. So next up, we will try to get a pair of gloves. And you know the drill, max level 68 and 3 chaos max buyout. Then we will add a life, elemental resist and a 17 minimum dexterity requirement stat filter to our search 2, as with that it will take us to 155 dexterity, and we thus no longer have to worry about getting more dexterity for our gear. Through this search we get quite a lot of results in return. This tells us that we can be a bit more strict with our life and resist rolls, so let's try that. Now this makes it a bit easier to pick the right choice for our build, and since we are armor based, we're going to inquire about this pair of dragon scale gauntlets, as they look pretty decent for our setup. Unfortunately, these were sold, and all the other ones available are mostly evasion based gloves, which to be honest, when just gearing to become map ready isn't too big of a deal. The amount of armor, dex or energy shield that gloves provide at this point in time typically doesn't make much of a difference in the grand scheme of things. However, most of the gems I use in my setup are red or strength based, and pure evasion gloves tend to roll primarily green sockets, similar to how energy shield based gloves tend to primarily roll blue sockets, and so forth. So for the sake of the video, we're going to go back to our filter and reduce the strictness a bit to see if an armor or at least hybrid armor evasion pair of gloves will show up. As we do the search anew and get new results, we can sort these by clicking the armor roll on one of the gloves to have it list the ones with the most armor highest on the list. We can also go back to our filter and add a bit of armor to ensure any future search is guaranteed to have some armor on them. This now gives us 9 choices to pick from, and of the ones available, I like the armor based ancient gauntlets listed for 3 chaos the most. So let's try and get those. With these, our dexterity and fire resistance base requirements are now capped, and we will thus be able to focus our future searches on getting intelligence, cold and lightning resist on an armor base of course, while also remembering to look for proper life rolls for any of the remaining gear. Next up, let's get a helmet. Here we will add a life, cold resist, lightning resist and an intelligence roll to our stat filter. We specifically use cold and lightning resist instead of total elemental resist, as we have already capped our fire resist and we don't want items with that showing up in our search. If we set a minimum of 9% lightning resistance, then we are also ensuring that the item we purchase will be able to cap our lightning resistance rolls, which means 1 less affix to worry about on future searches for our rings and boots, which then frees up other possibilities. We will also set a minimum of 30% cold resist, as we're still a bit away from being able to cap this. Our character also only have 68 intelligence at this point in time, and we will need 111 in total once we're done gearing. So if we can get a bit on the helmet and cap the rest via the rings and or boots, then that is great. This brings up 39 results, and if we wanted to, we could try and make it a bit more strict, but I actually really like the first result, as it provides a large amount of intelligence, has good armor and provides the resistances that we need, and for 1 chaos it doesn't get much better than this. With this helmet added to our gear, we now only need 2 more intelligence and 6 more lightning resistance to have all our requirements met for the build to work. This means that we have a lot of freedom to find the right pair of rings and boots for our setup. So let's first focus on capping the remaining intelligence and lightning resistance requirements. We will do that via the first ring we search for. Now for my build in particular, I also know that unless I have some mana regen on one of my rings, I'm going to run out of mana when I leap slam around. So I'm gonna add that to the stat filter too and then search. This brings up 28 results that we can pick and choose from, and I will simply press the life affix to have it sorted by that. I kinda like this glyph loop 2-stone ring, as it also has an open prefix and suffix that we can choose to further craft onto the ring if need be. Now that every basic requirement is met, we can pretty much add any other ring or pair of boots to our setup. That said, for boots, I much prefer if they have at least 25 to 30% movement speed, and in case a decent pair of boots with that roll is going to cost 3 chaos, I prefer getting these before my ring, as that will tell me how much currency I have left to shop for afterwards. So let's get the boots now, and since we don't have to worry about attributes nor elemental resistances, we have the liberty to add a fairly high life roll alongside the 30% movement speed filter that we would like to get. This obviously brings a lot of results in return, which means we can make it even stricter. So I'm going to add a chaos resistance and armor filter too. Out of the ones available, I like these dragon scale boots for 2 chaos, and we will get those. This leaves us with 3 chaos left, and we can get us a fairly decent ring for that. Preferably one with a good life roll and some chaos resistance, since we don't need much else. I like the Rapture Bane 2-stone ring here, and with that in the basket we now have ourselves a full gear set that is ready to map all the way up to tier 10 maps and perhaps even a bit further for less than 20 chaos orbs invested. So let's open up a couple of tier 10 maps and I will show you the build in action. And to further prove my point, I'm going to leave all of the 23 skill points unallocated and not equip a single jewel in my skill tree, despite having spent a skill point in some of these. And as you can see, it's actually going pretty well, right? Obviously, more expensive gear, better gear can make it go faster, but still, it's working pretty damn alright for the investment. Now, depending on which type of build you're playing, some of the roles are of course going to be different when you gear your character, but the principle remains the same. You need to focus on capping your resistances, attribute requirements, get a cheap 5-link, focus on either evasion, armor or energy shield, and of course if you are life based, try to get at least 60 and preferably more if possible flat life on any rare gear you may need. Lots of build guides you may stumble upon have unique item suggestions, but there's no point in trying to get those unless you fix the fundamental build requirements first. Even if you get yourself an expensive Atsiris Disfavor Axe, your build is going to feel like crap if you don't have your life, resists and so forth in check first. If you're a bodybuilder, you don't start by injecting steroids into your glutes before you get a gym membership either. Or when going on a date for the first time with a girl, you don't start by taking her anally outside the restaurant. You buy her a McFlurry first. Unfortunately, there are a lot of less experienced players that are under the impression that you need to be rich in this game to play it. But that is very far from the truth. As a matter of fact, once you understand how easy and cheap it is to gear your character, then you might actually realize that one of Path of Exile's core issues is that obtaining gear is so easy that it makes progressing the endgame feel too accessible, and that progressing there can feel like you haven't earned it. When it comes to expensive unique items, sure, they can add a lot of power to your build, but the point is that for the most part it isn't necessary. When I get expensive gear for my characters, it's because I want to try and push the upper limits of what the build can do rather than it being necessary. I'd go so far as to claim that any well-designed build can clear anything up to and including Uber Elder on less than what's equivalent of a 1 Exalt budget. Now, before we end, I want to share a few additional gearing tips with you. The first is to keep in mind that yellow or rare gear can roll a maximum of 6 affixes. Of these, there can be a maximum of 3 prefixes and 3 suffixes. Life and armor, evasion or energy shield are always prefixes, and resistances and attributes are always suffixes. Keep this in mind when you search for an item, as nothing will show up in case you are searching for an item with 4 suffixes, as that is simply not possible, with the exception of a few unique items. That for instance means that if you're looking for an item with a dexterity roll, then you can add a maximum of 2 additional resistance rolls to the search. Another thing is that rings, gloves and amulets can be a great source of additional flat physical or elemental damage rolls in case you need more damage, and while the numbers they provide may seem small compared to a high tooltip DPS number, you need to remember that these numbers are being scaled by the points you allocate in your skill tree or via other gear, so a 5 to 10 flat physical roll on a ring might actually make a notable difference to your total damage output. However, you should never prioritize getting flat damage numbers on your gear over life or resistances in case those basic requirements aren't covered yet. If you are attack based, gloves, rings and amulets can also be a great way of getting some extra attack speed. And if you're a caster, you can get cast speed on these too. But getting a good attack speed or cast speed roll alongside good life and resistance rolls typically end up increasing the price by a significant amount. When it comes to chaos resistance, unless you play in hardcore, I generally don't find it necessary to scale it further than up to around 0%, and in some cases you can go even lower. The thing is, chaos resistance rolls are typically much rarer than any of the other resistance rolls available, and if you want good chaos resistance alongside all of the other rolls you need, these items can end up becoming rather expensive. And while it has increased over time, there isn't that many monsters in the game that deal chaos damage specifically. And when they do, it's often in form of a degen that isn't going to kill you instantly. With exceptions, of course. Finally, jewels can be a great way to help you cover any remaining minor elemental resistance and attribute requirement rolls in case you weren't able to cap it all via your gear. But keep in mind that a jewel can't roll more than 4 affixes in total, and if you get attributes and or resistances on these, then it means you are potentially excluding something else, such as more damage modifiers or a life or energy shield roll. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. I hope you found this useful. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe and ring that bell icon for future Path of Exile guides and builds on this channel. As always, a big kiss to my patrons. I couldn't do this without you. If any of you out there watching right now wish to support future content, please visit patreon.com/liftingnerdbro. Thank you for watching, and bros, do you even nerd?